Podcast is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
I think just exposing guys to different levels hopefully gets them to see that and see like, oh my gosh, it's some good ball. And I think in Division III, you get so much more balance to your life. You know, there's certainly commitment. I think the guys that play at the highest levels of Division III, they get as much basketball as they want, but they can still do the internships in the summers. They can still they can still be a student. They can join clubs. They can follow their passions outside of basketball. So it sets you up in a number of ways, but you still get to kind of play ball and keep that ball bouncing as long as you can.
Coach Jeff Depelteau is currently the head varsity basketball coach at Christ School in Arden, North Carolina. The Greenies are considered to be one of the top programs in the state of North Carolina and in the country. Jeff previously coached at his alma mater, Suffield Academy, for 8 seasons, qualifying for the NEPSAC Tournament each year, advancing to the Final Four 6 times. Suffield advanced to the New England Prep Championships 3 times, winning the New England Class B Championship in 2013. Coach Depelteau was twice named New England Prep Coach of the Year in 2013 and 2017. During his 8 years leading the Suffield basketball program, over 40 of his student athletes moved on to play basketball at the NCAA Division I, II, and III levels. Coach Depelteau was involved with USA Basketball, working with the U16 and U17 men's national teams, and most recently with the USA Basketball Youth Division. In 2015, Jeff was selected as a winner of Nike's America's Got Basketball Coaching Talent Contest and spoke at the Nike Championship Basketball Coaches Clinic in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. His speech, Growing as a Coach, from this clinic was produced and marketed by Championship Productions. Coach Depelteau continues to travel and speak at basketball coaching clinics throughout the United States. Jeff also serves as the co-director of Pro Skills Basketball, Asheville. Make sure you're prepared to take some notes as you enjoy this episode with Coach Jeff Depelteau of the Christ School in Arden, North Carolina.
Hello and welcome to the Hoop Heads Podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here with my co-host Jason Sunkel. And today we have Coach Jeff Depelteau all the way from Arden, North Carolina with us. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. We're glad that you could join us tonight. Excited to have a conversation, learn a little bit more about you, your basketball journey, and give you a chance to share with other coaches and parents and players that are out there listening. So let's start out with your early days in basketball and how you got started and introduced to the game.
Yeah, my first memories of basketball are riding on Saturday mornings in our family station wagon to my dad's men's league games. And so he played in college and was a great high school player. He played at Bryant University, but he played until I think he was probably about 50 years old. And so we would just Saturday mornings going to the games, being around him and his friends. And he was my first coach in YMCA leagues and CYO, and he was just so impactful, and he has a passion, still does, and clearly passed that along to me.
And so do you still, as you're coaching today, do you still find yourself reaching back out to your dad when you run into situations that might warrant looking for some advice?
Absolutely, yeah. He at Christ School, we actually live stream most of our games, and so he watches all of them. And if I don't text him first, I'll have a text message from him of, kind of the post-game breakdown. What were you thinking here? You probably want to work on this in practice. So it's like he's our additional assistant coach, giving me all the feedback from Florida now.
That's funny. So do you guys stream those games? Because I'm assuming then you have players from different places. Is that why you guys stream them online, or is there some other reason?
We do, yeah. So at Christ School, we're a boarding school. So about 3/4 of our students board on campus, and they come from a range of places. On our team, we have kids from Pennsylvania. We've had kids from New York, obviously all over the Southeast. So we want to make it as accessible as possible for parents to be able to watch their kids play. And the tradition of basketball at the school is a really long and strong one. There was a period in the early part of this past decade where we won 5 straight state championships. We happen to have these 3 brothers, the Plumleys, who are pretty darn good.
Nice.
And yeah, and so you win a lot of basketball games when you got talent like that in the middle.
So being a boarding school, how is it difficult? Is there any like other challenges that you didn't know you were getting into when you started coaching in a boarding school that you have now, and how did you address those challenges?
So I've only coached in boarding schools.
Okay.
My first job coaching as a head coach was at Suffield Academy in Connecticut, and I coached there for 10 seasons. And just last year was my first year down at Christ School. And I think there's so many advantages, and then you can look at on the opposite end of the coin and see disadvantages. I mean, a lot of the schools that we compete against in North Carolina are day schools, and so they can have their players in the gym in the summers, and they're working out with them, even through club. We don't have that luxury, but when our kids are here, they're here. And so, we've got, kids that'll get up at 6 a.m. and get shots up before school. And on the weekends, they can get in and get shots or work with a coach if they're available and on campus. And that's kind of the culture of the school, is most of the people who work here live on campus. So I'd say for every advantage you have coaching in a boarding school, there's probably a disadvantage, but I really enjoy it because I think it brings the bond of the coach and the player even closer, because everybody at school, like my main job at school, I love basketball and it's clearly my passion, but I'm a college counselor first. That's what it says on my contract that I sign every year, is that I'm an associate director of college guidance. It doesn't say, and it's like, and you'll coach basketball. And so that's the really important stuff that I do here. And so you get to see those kids in the classes, and they get to see you in this job, and they get to see you working duty, and you get to see them in study hall. So everybody has this big mutual respect for one another, because everybody's doing more than one thing. In boarding schools, we call it, you wear many hats. And so you're just kind of switching them from day to day, even from minute to minute and hour to hour, of what your different roles can be on campus.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually have a guy here in Ohio. He's at Western Reserve Academy, and I was trying to. I talked to him. Was trying to get him, trying to set up one of my camps at Western Reserve Academy, and he was out of town traveling. He was in. I think when I talked to him, he was on his way to Kentucky, and he just had been traveling all over the place and just doing, again, college visits and talking to, or going down and talking to different kids, trying to get them, just exposing them to what Western Reserve had to offer. So it's an interesting, the prep school, is sort of a different way of looking at things, having a boarding school as opposed to what a traditional high school might be.
Yeah, and I think even within boarding schools, there's such a difference now too. I mean, so the league that I was in at Suffield is called the NEPSAC, and it's a tremendous league, and a lot of talent, and the coaching is tremendous. It's a lot of former college coaches. So it's truly competitive. And then you've got there's so many now kind of the fly-by-night prep schools that pop up too, and they all get bundled into the same category, and they're so different. And even within the boarding schools, they're so different. I think the traditional boarding schools that they have in New England and like we are at Christ School, the structure that we provide, and that's really what you get out of it. It truly is college prep in everything that we do, from the small class sizes, the academic rigor, the support that we can provide. But then you mix in the boarding environment where you're living with your faculty. And so for students that are in 9th, 10th, 11th grade, you're away from home, but you've still got plenty of support in place. So you're not totally kind of left to your own devices.
Right.
There's a lot there.
Yeah, so a couple questions that come up based on what we've kind of talked about to this point. You went to Suffield Academy.
I did a postgraduate year. So okay. I went to public high school from 9th through 12th grade. And when probably I was a junior in high school, I was all of about 6'3" and maybe 150 pounds soaking wet. So definitely had not developed. And even in the classroom, I hadn't matured as a student. And so just talking to my family, we had talked about it and thrown it around, and I went and interviewed at a few places, and Suffield was amazing. And I went and I played for a coach, Dave Godin, up there, and Dave coached and led the program for about 20 seasons. And he just was like a tremendous coach, but just a caring person. He was my advisor at the school. And when I took over the Suffield program, Dave is the one who handed it to me. And he was my assistant for my first 3 seasons. And so I learned so much from him. My first year, and actually my father was my other assistant when I first started. So I would go into these timeouts knowing that my 2 assistants had way more experience than me. And I would go in like, all right, guys, so what are we doing here? Like, you're the one who called the timeout. Let's figure this out, coach. But it
develop some confidence quick, right?
Yeah. And I always knew, I mean, Dave was just a super mentor in that he constantly was questioning me, not to be a jerk, but he was really getting me to lock into the big question of why I wanted to do everything. Because initially, I taught things because I knew them. I didn't really have a lot of conviction behind what I was doing. I probably had run it at some point as a player. I knew it well enough I could teach it, but beyond that, there wasn't a lot behind it. And Dave in particular is somebody who pushed me to really, well, why don't you try something different and figure out what works and figure out what doesn't for you. And that's where I got a little bit more comfortable kind of sticking my toe in the water and trying some new things, running different stuff, different defenses, different drills. Just getting out of my comfort zone as a coach.
So do you think that that's a key trait for an assistant coach? Like if you're a head coach and you're looking for an assistant, I hear you saying that by having an assistant that's not a yes man, somebody who's questioning you, somebody who's bringing their own ideas, is that something that you look for when you're trying to put together a staff?
Absolutely. I think for me, I always try and surround myself with coaches who are really, really good where I'm not, and kind of can compliment me in those areas. I just want people who aren't going to come in and just say yes all the time. And I'm constantly, like, after practices or workouts, I'll text coaches and say, text my assistants, what'd you think? What will we do different? What do you think we need to do? And I don't think that I have all the answers. I know I don't have all the answers. And that's the strength of having a staff, I think, is really utilizing them and having the understanding that I'm not going to take everything that you say, but I really value everything that you're going to offer, and I'm going to think about it. And that creates a really close-knit coaching staff.
Yeah, I agree. I think when you have a good relationship with your assistants and they feel empowered to be able to share and know that they're valued, I think that sets up a situation where even though you may disagree behind closed doors, you can all go out and put a united front because everybody has respect for one another and the ideas that people are bringing. I think that's a great way of looking at it and being able to build a staff. Let's jump back to so you go back and you're coaching at your alma mater. What was that like to see it from the other side of the table when you were there as a player and a student, and now you come back and you're there coaching? And talk a little bit about how maybe that had a little bit of a strange feeling maybe at first, or how you went about that. It was
awesome to coach in a program that you played in. It's a different level of passion, I think, than coaching, just coaching somewhere. And I have an assistant this year at Christ School who graduated from the program, and you read it on him. You can see it in his body language. It's this mix of, like, you want to just give back as much as you feel like the program has given to you. And it really is an amazing feeling. But they're definitely, especially having an assistant who was your coach, who you look up to so much, like starting out, there were times where that was hard. And I think it was hard for him as well, because, he had run this thing for 20 years and all of a sudden somebody else was. And as much as I did a lot of things the same as him, I did things differently too. And I don't know if I would have been able to handle it as well as he have, in such a supportive way of, like, all right, let's keep this thing going. And I think what we did was, he always said to me, you know, when I took over this program, my goal was to leave it better than I found it, and I think I did that. And that's the way that I look back on it, is I think I left the program in a better place than I found it, but still honoring definitely the tradition and you know, building upon that and left it in a good place for the next person.
So two questions there. One, did he step down voluntarily before you? I mean, was he just looking to ease out of the job and then said, "Hey, I'll stick around to be Jeff's assistant"?
So that first,
how did that work?
Yeah, so that first year, it was my second year out of college. My first year out of college, I worked at a boarding school as an assistant coach, and I worked for an awesome head coach who gave me. I learned a lot from him. And so my second year out of college, there was an admissions job at Suffield that I started in that office, and I started as an assistant JV coach and an assistant varsity coach, and the varsity coach, David, said, you know, come as much as you want. And I told him, like, I'll be there every single day. And about halfway through the season, we would go out and grab a bite to eat after every game and just break things down. And about halfway through the season, he said, you know, what would you think about taking over the program? And that was the first time we talked about it. And I told him, I don't know that I'm ready to be a head coach, but I would love to do it. And if you ask me to do it, I'm not going to say no. And we kept the conversation going. And I think it was probably 2 or 3 weeks later, he had the same conversation. He said, well, what if I handed it over to you, but I'll stay on as your assistant until you're totally comfortable and can make it your own. And then we fast forward to maybe 2 years later, and it was after a game. We got into a timeout, and it had been that point those first couple years where I'd kind of be looking at him, and because we would huddle together before we went and talked to the team, and I had the clipboard. I said, all right, this is what we're going to do. He kind of tapped me walking back, and he's like, you're ready. This thing's yours. It was a really cool kind of passing of the torch moment, and I'll never forget that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think that just the fact that, you know, early on, and obviously had a lot of experience with you, you know, knew you as a player, but then for you to be able to gain his respect as a coach, which again, I think, just like you said initially, when you have that relationship that you had previously where it was a coach-player relationship, and now you've shifted that relationship to coach-coach, obviously it changes. And the fact that, you know, he had that level of respect for you and, you know, as an assistant, and then really saw something in you that you could be a head coach when maybe you didn't necessarily think that you were ready for that, I think speaks a lot about both of you in terms of the relationship that you guys have built. So that's, you know, again, that's, I think, a credit to both of you. So talk a little bit about why, obviously, Suffield is your alma mater. So what prompted you to leave and go to Christ School?
So the decision to move to Christ School was completely a family decision. So my wife also works in boarding schools. She grew up on a boarding school campus. Her folks both taught at boarding schools. So she had the life that our children have now of only growing up in a boarding school environment, which is, like, in hindsight, I think the coolest way to grow up. You end up with like 200 or 300 big brothers and sisters around you all the time. And you get to go to all these student events. It's a really cool way to grow up. But anyways, so she's been in schools, and so she was the assistant academic dean at Suffield. And this opportunity came up where she could be the academic dean and really make a big jump career-wise. And then both sets of our families live down south. And so, you know, my wife's folks live just north of Atlanta, so that puts us about 3 hours away from them. My folks relocated down to Florida from Massachusetts. And so that cut our drive time to see our parents considerably.
Right,
you know, it was a great opportunity for career growth for my wife. And with the history of the program at Christ School, I mean, we knew that basketball, it's a big part of the culture here. And just an opportunity. I wasn't really guaranteed that I would be a head coach down here. That kind of worked out as the season, and I wouldn't say worked out, but that happened as the season went on. And it just, I mean, those pieces kind of ended up
falling into place.
That's how I would describe it. But it really was more of a family move to get down here, and the basketball part just happened to fall into place.
So, being it when you come in, and obviously there was a tradition there before, and so now you come in as a new coach. How is it to navigate that situation? Do you say, "Wow, I'm taking nearly everything because the culture has been so good"? What pieces do you bring, add, take away from your own experiences previously that you bring into this new environment where there's obviously already been a history of success? How do you go about that?
Well, and even that situation, it was so different last year. So I started out as the assistant coach. So we went through our full preseason, and I was an assistant. And there was some just unfortunate family things that happened with our coach who was leading the program when I got here. And he ended up stepping down 5 games into the season. So even like midstream, roles kind of changed. And it was really difficult just because I was still a guy that nobody on the roster had come to play for. And in a boarding school environment, I mean, that's part of it. We don't necessarily recruit, but a lot of times kids come to the school to play in a program or play for a coach. So it was hard, but I spent a lot of last year just trying to get to know the kids and get them to trust me and understand that I know a little bit about coaching, but number one, I care about them as kids and as students at the school and student athletes, and not just as kids that are going to go out and try and win basketball games. But it was really hard. We ended up having a really good season. We had a lot of talent, and we returned most of the kids this year. So, through the spring and even through this fall, we've done more, I would say, culture building than we did at any point last year, just because there was so much transition going on.
Right. Yeah. Just trying to jump into it right in the middle of the season.
Yeah. So
sure.
my first game was was coming off of Thanksgiving break. So we had 0 practices. We had to drive down to Atlanta and play McCutcheon, who I think at the time was like number 9 in the country, and they beat the pants off us.
Welcome to your new job.
Yeah.
Congrats.
So describe what I'm hearing you talk about there is the need to build relationships with your kids. Mm-hmm. And so talk about some of the concrete things that you've done to be able to build that culture, to be able to build those relationships with the kids. Explain to us how you go about doing that as a coach.
I think, like, number one, they need to know and see that you care about them unconditionally. So before they're really going to trust you on the court, I mean, from my experiences, like, they need to know that you care more about them as people, as students, than just basketball players. So, I mean, a lot of that trust building is, I mean, I think, taking one of your players out to go to Moe's is going to go a long way. When there's food involved, you can always have some good conversation, but it's a lot of like talks in the office. A lot of times not even talking about basketball, trying to learn about their families, trying to learn about what their journey's been like to this point, what brought them here, what their goals are. And then when you try and figure out, kind of each one of the players that you're working with, what their why is, then you can really figure out how you can plug in and help them reach that goal. And that's how you show them you care, is when they understand that you understand them as a whole. I think that's when you can push them, is when when they know you have their back.
Do you think that that's an advantage for you being at a boarding school where you have them more as, I don't want to say a captive audience, but you can, since they're there on campus all the time, you have more time to maybe have those conversations than somebody who is teaching at, let's say, a public high school might have?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's built in. But again, like, we don't have the summers. So, I've got a guy who plays for us who lives in Pittsburgh, and so when he leaves for the summer, I don't see him other than through text messages or any highlights that might go up on Twitter. But that's it. So you try and keep the contact going, but you got to do a lot of work. When you do have them, and it's constantly checking in. So like even today, I had a couple meetings with guys who just checking in, and we're getting ready to crank up the season. We start practice October 29th, so making sure everybody's on the same page heading into things. But just those periodic check-ins, I mean, they go a long way.
So as your players, it's kind of an interesting question for me. When your players leave for the summertime, so school year ends and they're heading their separate ways, describe the process for what you leave them with on their way out the door in the summer. Like, are you giving them workouts? How are you checking? Where are you playing your summer AAU club basketball?
Mm-hmm.
What's that process like in terms of you guiding them into the summer of what your expectations are and what you hope they get out of their summer when they're away from you?
Well, so most of the guys who are here, I mean, their goal is to play college basketball. And I think, the way the school's set up as a college prep academic program, the kids who come here to play, that's their goal as well. And so we try and set that up as much as possible. So there's a lot. We're talking about a lot of the spring. We break down film from the previous season. We'll have done a lot of goal setting and workouts in the springtime and try and build the foundation. And it's really about adding to their toolbox so they can do things on their own. If they don't have a trainer, if they're just going to the local Y or the open gym, but they've got enough stuff in their toolbox where they've got drills that they can do on their own, so they're continuing to improve. And it's kind of about showing them a little bit and then giving them a little bit more, showing them a little bit, giving them a little more. So you kind of have to get creative. I mean, sometimes it's even setting up, your phone or laptop and you've got to demo it and then text them a little video of, all right, here's the next thing you got to do. And then, from the exposure side, like I try and promote them on Twitter as much as I can with, what events they're going to be at, what courts they're going to be on. So I just have them constantly texting me either what courts they're going to be on, what events, be as specific as possible. Some guys will send, their stats from a previous game or highlights if they have them, and I'll just try and put that out, to my couple hundred Twitter followers.
There
but
you go.
Anything to kind of help them. And I think within the basketball community, like we've got a lot of people in North Carolina, and when I was up in New England, there were a lot of people as well who just were in it to help the kids. It didn't matter if they played for you or not. So I think that's where we help each other as coaches is retweeting. When you've got good kids, I would always try and help out guys at other programs. If a coach called me and said, hey, are there any good guards in your league? If we didn't have any, I would always call Coach so-and-so over here. They've got some players that you might want to look at. But yeah, getting back into what you're asking about for the off season, once we don't get them, I think even now in high schools, it's almost a little bit of recruiting your guys and making sure they're coming back. There's so many. I think this year in August, there was something like 20 or 30 high school kids that transferred to other schools at that point. So it's a little bit of that too, just making sure you're constantly communicating with your guys to make sure, that they know that you still care and you're involved and you can't wait to get back and work with them.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think that's a challenge for coaches everywhere, regardless of what type of high school you coach at. I think that recruiting your own players, recruiting kids from the younger ages, like I think of public schools around here, and I think some of the public schools that do the best job here in the Cleveland area are public schools that have coaches that are involved with their youth programs and that build those connections. And obviously you don't have the same situation there in terms of having a youth feeder system, but by the same token, I think what I hear you saying is that you've got to be engaged with your current players, because there's always that threat that that they're going to transfer, and we know that the Division I transfer rate is huge, and that's starting to trickle down into college or into high schools where if a kid doesn't, things don't go exactly the way they want, or the coach isn't building the kind of relationship that they need, that kid's likely to walk out the door and go somewhere else. So I'm sure that's a challenge that you face all the time.
Yeah, and I think now, especially with high school coaches, with club coaches, there's almost this fear of being honest with kids, because if they don't take it the right way, I mean, it's one of, I think, the most delicate skills you can have as a coach is communicating. Like, can you communicate the reality of what's going on to your players and their parents and be realistic to them and get them to understand their potential without losing them?
Yeah.
And what, I forget who told me this, but I mean, you've almost got to get them to understand who's telling you this and what do they have to lose, and that's almost how much you can value what they're telling you. So if somebody's telling you, oh yeah, you're Division I, or you're going to be a college player, or you should be playing on your varsity team, but that person doesn't call a timeout all year, like, they don't have a lot to lose by selling that to you, But if it's somebody who is telling you that, who could potentially lose you, and understand by telling you the truth that you might transfer, you might leave, they got a lot to lose, but them telling you that really is them trying to help you.
Yeah, Coach Showalter, when we talked to him the other day, he talked a lot about how a lot of times when those kids get to, and I know you've been involved with USA Basketball, we'll get to that eventually, but he talked about the fact that when these kids come in for the the U16, U17 tryouts, and obviously those are some of the best players in the country, but oftentimes they just haven't been told the truth about their game, because to your point, a high school kid says, a high school coach is a little bit leery of pointing out holes in their best player's game for fear that kid's gonna be like, everybody's telling me how great I am. Why are you telling me I'm not? I'm gonna leave and go somewhere else. And obviously parents or trainers, people that have things to gain from their association with those players, there's not a lot of incentive to point out the flaws in their game and really help them to get better. So he's, he told us that, hey, when these guys come in, sometimes we're the first set of coaches that have ever really told them, hey, this is what you need to work on. I think that's something that, again, people who maybe aren't coaches forget or don't understand how to walk that. You're walking a delicate line there with wanting to help the kids versus driving them away. I think that's definitely something that coaches worry about.
Well, and one thing that, and I think parents in particular, and coaches and new coaches don't understand, and Coach Showalter, I heard him talk about this at a clinic, but he said, when you're going to talk to parents and you're a coach, you've got to go into the conversation understanding you're talking about two completely different people. I'm going in as a coach talking about Johnny, who is one of 15 guys on my roster, and then Johnny's mom and dad are coming in to talk about the center of their universe. And so you're never going to be on the same page, but you just got to hope that you can get to the point where you can get them to understand where you're coming from. I totally understand where you're coming from as parents. I'm a parent myself, but how do we get those pieces to fit together? And that's how I try and frame the conversations when I talk to parents from a basketball perspective. I mean, that's how I try and frame the conversations when I talk to them as their college counselor when we get into those meetings, is we're really just trying to make sure we're on the same page.
Here's one question that I've always found to be interesting, and I think it's something that a lot of coaches find to be a challenge. When you have a kid, and obviously in your program, you have, as you talked about before, a lot of the kids have college basketball aspirations. They want to play at that level, and you may have more kids at your school than a normal high school might that have a realistic chance of playing. But when you run into a player who has, and a family who has an unrealistic expectation of the level that they can play at, let's just say that there's a kid who clearly is not going to be able to play much above a Division III level, let's say, and they want to get Division I looks, and the parents or the player come to you and say, hey, will you contact school X about my son? And school X is a Division I school, and in your heart of hearts that kid's not good enough to play at that level. How do you handle a situation like that with parents and players?
So especially in a situation where we are we're a boarding school, and I mean, some of these families are paying a lot of money to send their children here.
Right.
Like I'm here to serve them, and if they want me to reach out to, I'll always be honest with them, and I'll always tell them at the end of the day, I don't give out any scholarships to colleges.
For sure.
I'm going to give you my opinion, and you may not like it, but if there's a situation where you ever want me to reach out to a program, I'll always do that, and I'll try and get feedback from them, and I'm going to pass that feedback along, and so I try and I think the biggest thing that I try and do is really take the emotion out of it and just try and present as much fact as possible. So, whether it's, and I try not to make it a situation of, you got player X, player Y, player Z on your team. Well, you're player Z and player X plays the same position as you, and you're not even better than him, and he's not going to play.
Right.
So you can't make it about that, because parents don't want to hear the comparison game.
No, for sure.
But I think you've got to, really, I mean, at the end of the day, I try and tell families you are who you're recruited by. And so if you go out to tournaments and you get letters and you get phone calls and you get text messages from Division III schools, that's probably like those coaches know what kind of kids can play on their teams. And if you're, if you've got, Mike Krzyzewski calling you, you can probably play at Duke. But that's, and I'll always try and have those conversations at different points too. So, heading into their junior year, all right, this is who's been reaching out, if anybody. At the end of the season, this is who's been reaching out. But at a point, we've got to try and get realistic about who's really interested, or if anybody's interested, and if not. And usually when we come back in the fall of the senior years, we'll say, all right, who's called you? Who's invited you to campus? And that's when we can start to have those conversations. And it does tend to sink in at those points.
Right. So how much of a learning curve was there for you in terms of knowing how to navigate that process to best benefit your players? Because I would think that when you first started, you may have been, just not aware of exactly how that whole process worked. And so describe a little bit about how you learned the best ways to go about handling those situations and making sure that you're helping your kids.
I mean, I tried, especially my first probably 5 years coaching, to work as many camps as I could, and just start to build relationships with all the college assistant coaches and really other high school coaches, and pick their brains and use them as resources. So I would a lot of times try and find somebody who coaches at a level where a guy wants to go to, or maybe has, and just say, hey, what are your thoughts? What areas do you think he needs to get better? And I played Division III basketball, so I have a little kind of glimpse of at least what it takes and how fast the game is. And I'm one of the proponents of Division III, and I don't think it gets enough respect from high school kids in general. But just to try and get that sense, I think it's you want to arm yourself with as much info as possible. So even going to practices, at Suffield, we had a lot of kids who played in college and were already there. So I would oftentimes try and bring those guys back, either to play with our guys or to just talk about what it's like to be at that level, and what the commitment's like, and what the players are like. And, that helps when you can bring in kind of that third party who doesn't have much at stake to talk about what it's like, or what a Division I player looks like, what a Division II player looks like. And then also, I like to do field trips, so I would try and bring guys that wanted to play at the next level. We'd go see a college practice. Like when I was at Suffield, we'd go down to Quinnipiac and watch those guys practice, or go to Yale. You could see some really good basketball and really good coaching. And I think when guys can actually get out there and see it, and then you go check out an Amherst College, or like a highest level Division III, or Springfield College, At Suffield, we would play a lot of college JV teams. And so that was a really good way to get a sense of that too. When you get out there and you're playing against Division III JV players, so guys that can't even play, and they're bigger and stronger and faster than you. It's a little bit of an awakening sometimes for guys.
So you said something that was kind of interesting to me. Is you said something about a lot of high school players you feel don't give Division III the respect that, or I don't remember exactly how you phrased it, but they don't seem to be interested in Division III. And I actually find it, around here at least, and I don't know if it's because we've got a lot of Division III schools that are like very strong basketball programs, that we do. I do hear a lot of kids talking about like D3 in a positive light. So what makes you think that, and what makes you, and maybe it's just the area you are in, like what do you think about Division III basketball in a sense in relation to that?
There's not a lot of Division III where we are down south.
Okay.
There's probably a handful. Now in New England, I think you could turn around and hit like a 3-iron in any direction, and the ball would hit a Division III school, and a really good one. But I just think kids get so hung up on scholarships and the idea of scholarships, and a lot of them don't understand there's like a lot of other ways to pay for college, number one. But they don't understand how good the level of play is at Division III compared, and that it's not that far off from Division I. I played with 2 or 3 guys that at the Division III level, one who broke our school's all-time assist record, and he could play on any scholarship level roster in the country. He could play, and I played with a scoring guard who scored almost 2,000 points. He could play anywhere. By the time Division III guards or juniors and seniors, they could play anywhere. And that's why, like when I was in college, the big upset was Williams College coming off of a national D3 national championship. They upset Holy Cross in one of their money games, and it was like all over Sports Center. But like being from New England, you knew the dudes that played at Williams, and it wasn't really a big surprise because they could play. So one of our guys this year went and visited a Division III down south, and he came back, and I always have the guys when they come back from visits, what'd you notice? And he came back and he was like, guys, it was so fast. Like the guys played so fast. They got up and down, and it was so physical. It was just such a big difference from high school basketball. And so I think just exposing guys to different levels hopefully gets them to see that and see like, oh my gosh, it's some good ball. And I think in Division III, you get so much more balance to your life. There's certainly commitment. I think the guys that play at the highest levels of Division III, they get as much basketball as they want, but they can still do the internships in the summers. They can still, they can still be a student. They can join clubs. They can follow their passions outside of basketball. So it sets you up in a number of ways, but you still get to kind of play ball and keep that ball bouncing as long as you can.
Yeah, I think one of the things that always is a challenge for kids is just understanding A, what level they can play at, but then B, also understanding what the right fit is for them. Because a lot of times you could have a kid who might have, again, their skill level would allow them, as you described, to play at any level, but they might be a 2,000 point scorer in Division III, and they might be they might be a 4-year bench player at a Division I school. And, so sometimes it just depends on what the best fit is. And a lot of times I know, just speaking from just some experience that I have, is just on a D1 level, a lot of times it's not necessarily the skill level of the player. It's just the physical tools that the player brings. So instead of, you have a Division I forward might be, 6'8", 230, and a Division III forward might be 6'4", 210, and it's not that the 6'8" guy is more skilled. It's just he has those physical tools that allow him to compete at that higher level. And I think, as you said, Division III sometimes gets shortchanged, and kids look at it as, oh, I'm settling for this, but for a lot of people it ends up being the right choice. And, a lot of guys, when you're in high school, you still kind of hold this pipe dream that you're going to play in the NBA, you're going to play professional, and when you say, "Oh, I'm going to go Division III," that sometimes bursts guys' bubble in that way. So I think there's a little bit of that, but definitely the level of play. If you ever get a chance to go and see a Division III game or get out on the floor with Division III players, like you said, you'll find that the level of basketball is very, very high.
No question. Yeah. And I think the other thing to talk about, and this is me more the college counselor coming out, is just finding the right fit for the school more as a school. I was somebody who went and I wanted to play after college wherever I could. But 23 games into my freshman year, I tore my ACL. And I never played in another game after that. I practiced and I stayed a part of the program. It got me into coaching earlier than I ever would have imagined, which was kind of the blessing in disguise. But luckily, I chose a school that was a great fit for me, and so even when the basketball, when it couldn't bounce for me anymore, I still had plenty to fall back on, and got a great education out of it.
Yeah, I think sometimes that's underrated in terms of the decision-making process, because so much of what kids look at is, the coach, the program, the level, and they forget about the fact that, the school piece of it is very important, and ultimately probably the most important in terms of setting yourself up for your future. So before you got injured, did you know that you wanted to be a coach, or was it something that you only came to realize after the playing was taken away from you?
I knew I wanted to be involved with basketball as long as I could possibly be involved with basketball. I didn't really get the bug to coach until I got hurt. So my freshman year I got hurt. My sophomore year I ended up taking a semester off from school, and I was home. I took some community college classes. I worked part-time, and at the public high school that I attended, the coach who coached me, his name's Jeff Depelteau. He invited me to help out as an assistant coach. And at the time, there was 3 other guys that I had played with that were also, they went to school locally, so they were assistants, and it was a blast. But Coach was so trusting in us as assistants. He would come up to us in the middle of the drill that was going on, and he would say, "Hey, Jeff, you got the next drill. We're doing a rebounding drill. It's yours." And so within three minutes, you had to figure out what you wanted to do and how you wanted to teach it. And he kind of put you on the spot, but it was like such a safe space to do it, because you had your friends there with you, and you knew he was going to support you. And after, he was going to all right, how will we do this different next time? But you always also had to be on your toes. So by mid-season, I found myself kind of thinking through, all right, we're doing shell right now, but if he comes up to me, I want to have a shooting drill ready, and I want to have a rebounding drill ready, and I got to have – so you became super prepared as an assistant coach. So, but I also came back, and that's when I caught the bug, 100%. It was so much fun. The team won, and we had an awesome group of kids. But just going through it and kind of enjoying the coaching fraternity side of it, that's where I was hooked and had to be a part of it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best things about coaching is, especially when you're on a good staff. I was fortunate when I was coaching in high school. I was an assistant varsity coach at the school where I teach for 13 years with we had the exact same staff. So our head coach was there for 13 years. I was the varsity assistant, and then we had a JV coach who was also there the entire time. And the 3 of us didn't know each other going in, but got to be really good friends over the course of that 13 years. All of us stayed in our same position, and just there was nothing better than after a game or after a practice going back and sitting down in the coach's office and just having that camaraderie. And that's probably the one thing that I miss more than any piece of coaching at the high school level is that camaraderie that you had. That just, it's hard to duplicate that. It's hard to replace that.
Absolutely.
Let's jump out of your job, your day job as far as coaching goes, and let's talk about some of the things you're doing outside of high school coaching, and talk about how you got involved with USA Basketball.
So, actually, when I just started coaching at Suffield, I coached at a day camp at Amherst College. It's called Western Mass Basketball Camp. And Dave Hickson, who's a legendary coach, he's won 1,000 games. It's his camp. But he always has his coaches. He has his incoming freshmen come and work the camp. So I'd worked the camp when I was probably a senior in high school and probably for 5 or 6 years after that. But one of his graduate assistants, and all the Clevelanders out there will recognize this name, was Kobe Altman, now GM of the Cavs. And so Kobe and I got to know each other over the course of 2 summers when he was there, and he was working on his master's at Eisenberg School of Management. And the second summer, he came back and worked camp, and he had this big shiny gold medal around his neck, and he had worked on as support staff for Coach Showalter in the first ever 17 and under World Championship. They went to New Zealand, and they had Bradley Beal and Andre Drummond, and it sounded like an unbelievable experience. And so Kobe and I just talked, and that next year at Amherst, Kobe was recruiting. It ended up being 3 of the guys that I coached ended up going to Amherst. And but I'd said to Kobe, is there any way to get involved with USA Basketball? Like, this sounds awesome. He said, well, let me just shoot an email. And he sent an email to BJ Johnson, who was the director of the junior national team at the time. And BJ emailed right back and said, yeah, you're more than welcome to come out. Here's our dates of our camps. And so that year it worked out where I could go out and observe the under 18 national team trials. So I went out for the entire team trials. And Billy Donovan was the head coach of the team, and he had Mark Few and Shaka Smart as assistants. And I would get there probably an hour and a half before the practices and just watch or rebound for guys. And then just try and watch and observe the coaches. I met a few different people that were really great. I met a guy named Terry Layton, who works on the international side for Nike scouting, but he lives in Colorado Springs, and he coached for years. And so I ended up having lunch with him every time I was out there. But he would say, all right, get the roster. I want you to pick your team. Pick your 12, because there was 30 guys out there. And so it just kind of challenged you a little bit, and hearing his philosophies that he's learned, and he would pass along, his little one-liners that he's learned from Coach Raveling. But the last day of the 18 and under team trials, Coach Showalter showed up, and at the time I had done I was on USA Basketball's website probably more time than I should be, considering I had a full-time job. And I knew immediately who Coach Showalter was. So I just went up to him and wished him luck for the U17 team trials that was about to start. And I guess that triggered something. He didn't think that I should know who he was. So he invited me to work his camp out in Iowa, Snow Valley Basketball School, which is a pretty amazing place. And I got connected with a couple other coaches that I still talk to this day. Coach King, who I know you did a podcast with a couple weeks ago, he's one of my best friends in coaching now. And I met him, and he's the one who encouraged me to ask Coach Showalter if they needed any help for the October minicamp. And that was the first time I went out and really did anything on an official basis. I worked as a support staff member. So that group of guys, like Jason Tatum was there, and Harry Giles, Thomas Bryant, Josh Jackson. It was a really cool group of guys. But to see it firsthand, and Coach Flannery from St. Ed's was out, and he was Coach Showalter's assistant, one of his assistants at the time. So you just got to be around great coaches who totally let their guard down. And I think my experience with coaches and great coaches to that point was like I'd go to a clinic, and you'd hear the clinician speak, and then they almost kind of get whisked off, and you don't get any interaction with them. And so to be at USA Basketball, and between practices, you sit down and you've got guys like Coach Flannery or Coach Showalter, John Olive, who's tremendous and out on the West Coast, and they're all diagramming stuff with salt and pepper shakers and writing stuff out on napkins, and just like so eager to share and help the next guy. It kind of lit a fire that I wanted to continue to learn and get better. And then to see kind of the best guys in the country, like you mentioned, Coach Showalter mentioned, get out there and compete against each other. it's just amazing to see when really good players get out of their comfort zone and push each other and how good they can become. So it was amazing. And then so through that, I was introduced to Jay Demings, who is the director of the youth development program. And that's what I've done most recently is a lot of stuff with the youth development program. So I've been a lead clinician at a couple of their regional camps, and I've spoken at some of the coach academies just to share whatever little tidbits I've picked up over the years. But it's been amazing just to connect. And through USA Basketball, I've been able to connect with a lot of coaches across the country, and again, just do whatever I can to kind of pay it forward and help the next person grow a little bit.
Describe a little bit about what goes on at the regional camps for people out there who may not be familiar with those. Talk a little bit about what your role is, what exactly you do as the lead clinician there, and then, again, what those look like. So
the first one that I worked was the first one that they ever had, and it was in Houston. Not directly aligned with, but it was the same weekend as the Final Four in 2015, I believe, and maybe 16. I'm not positive, but it was just amazing, and we kind of ran it a lot like the way that Snow Valley is run. Instead of a camp where you get together and run stations, we picked a set of skills, based on the USA Basketball curriculum that we wanted to cover, but we taught them all at the same time, so every guy was doing the same thing at groups. There was enough coaches at baskets, so guys were getting coached at baskets, and kids were getting reps and getting better throughout the weekend. And I think that camp, Tate's Lock was the lead clinic. He was like the camp director. And then there were about 6 or 7 lead clinicians, and we would lead clinics. But you'd have your lead clinician that leads the clinic to the whole camp. You teach a little bit, you get everybody to baskets to rep. You bring them back, teach a little bit more, send them back to baskets to rep. And so you're just constantly building on a skill for a set amount of time. And so you can get a lot accomplished by keeping it simple, doing it that way. And that's for the most part the way that it's been adopted. And it's maybe some of the clinics change a little bit, but that form of teaching it, I think, has stayed consistent with the regional camps. And that's the way at the national team trials. Before they break out and play, when they're talking about skill stuff, they're doing a lot of, they're doing line passing. They're doing the same stuff that happens at these regional camps. So, I would highly recommend, if regional camps get into, whatever area listeners are going to, it's a great way to build those the foundational stuff that they're going to need to get to that next level, to advance to, intermediate, to performance level. You gotta build a strong foundation before you can move up.
Yeah, for sure. I pulled 2 things out of what you just said. One is, I think that, in today's culture, kids spend a lot more time playing games than they do working on fundamentals. So I think when you get an opportunity to have an experience like Snow Valley, or you have an experience like the USA Basketball regional camps, I think those experiences are unfortunately somewhat unique to, kids that are growing up in our basketball system today. So I would totally echo what you just said. If you have an opportunity to, attend one of those as a player, or you're a parent listening and your kids have an opportunity to attend those, I think that's, would be a tremendous opportunity. And the second thing that I pulled out, and this is more of a question, is when you're at the regional camp or you're at Snow Valley, how does it work when you break out into those smaller groups at the basket, from a coaching standpoint, how many coaches typically are at a basket teaching the skill? Because we got the feeling, and again, I didn't follow up with Coach Showalter on this one, but it sounds like there's maybe a lead coach at a basket, and then maybe a younger coach or someone who's new to the program also at the basket that's kind of learning. Again, it's sort of a coach the coaches type situation. So can you describe what that process looks like?
Absolutely. So at Snow Valley, the way that we'll do it is you'll have your lead clinician, and they're going to bring in all the coaches before their clinic starts and say, hey, coaches, this is what we're going to be doing. This is what we're going to be teaching. Our areas that we're really going to focus on are going to be X, Y, and Z. So really hammer that home. And there'll be some coaches, some new coaches, some experienced coaches. But I just remember, like, the first year I worked Snow Valley, I was not a lead clinician on anything. I just worked a basket. But, like, there's nothing better at Snow Valley than, like, having a lead clinician come up to you after the clinic that they just taught and give you 5 and be like, man, you killed it at your basket. You taught, like, it was awesome. And same thing if you're a lead clinician, you got coaches that come up to you after, like, it's not like you're trying to show off, but there's a lot of mutual respect for coaches that are really getting after it at camps like that. And as far as the numbers go, I believe it's 7 campers to every 1 coach at Snow Valley. So, in sessions, like their sessions, they'll sell out. They'll have 500 kids. We'll have 80 coaches there. And so there's a lot of teaching that goes on. And it's really like when you've got 2 coaches at a basket and a lead clinician, you can pull a player out and really show them how to do it the right way and fix their footwork. And there's still somebody who's teaching and repping. So that's why a lot of good work gets done at a camp like that.
When you're there, how many notes do you take when you go back to the dorm at night and write down things that you're like, oh man, I got to remember what Coach X said this and Coach Y was showing. Like how full is your notebook when you leave?
It's I started out. I brought 1 notebook the first year and I filled that up by like day 2. And now I'll bring my laptop because my handwriting is atrocious, and so I have to type it out. And
we don't relate to you at all. We don't relate at all to you there.
But it's and you don't sleep a lot. So at the camp, like, you're up at 6 a.m., you're on the court at 6:30, and really you're leaving the gym at 11 o'clock at night. One of the nights, Coach Showalter always sets up a coaching clinic for the coaches by one of usually the NBA guys or somebody from USA Basketball or somebody who's had just unbelievable experience who wants to share. And so you'll be up till 1 o'clock that night. But most nights you're up till 1, 2 a.m. because you're just sharing with all the coaches. And it's like, I don't know, there's a phrase that I picked up pretty quickly, and I never have to worry about this too much, but if you're the smartest guy in the room, you need to find a new room. So, I'm always good there, but it's just like you're constantly in rooms with people that have done more, who've probably, like in my case, who've probably forgotten more than I've learned. But and you come back so energized. Like I'll do 5-10 practice plans on my flights out and my flights back just because I'm so jazzed up about everything I've learned.
So who are some of the people that, when you've obviously coached Showalter and you mentioned Tate's Lock, but who are some of the people maybe that are out there that somebody who's listening may not have heard of? Because again, there's a lot of great coaches that are famous that people have heard of, but then there's a lot of guys out there that are just doing a tremendous job that nobody's ever heard of. So who's out there that you learned something or you picked something up that you could share with us and kind of give somebody credit who maybe there's a lot of people out there that don't know who they are?
Ooh,
I don't mean to put you on the spot. You got like 25 guys on your list, I'm sure, but
yeah, there's too many. No, I mean, one of the first years that I went out, I ended up. He picked me up at the airport. I had no idea who he was, but Dave Bullwinkle, who he's a scout for the Bulls now. He does some commentary for, I think, Mountain West Conference now, and. But he's been a Division I coach, and just some of the tidbits that he drops about leadership, and he does a lot with point guard development, but leadership development, and he does it with companies. But I always like to pick his brain too about stuff. It usually falls right around the draft or after the draft. So what they were thinking, how guys interviewed, what they're looking at when they're interviewing guys. And or interviewing people around guys for the draft. I love picking his brain about that stuff. I mean, coaching philosophy wise, probably my 3 or 4 people that I turn to the most that I met through Snow Valley. Definitely Matt King, who you guys have interviewed. Greg White, who you guys have interviewed. good friend of mine, Nick Legalbo, who coaches at Lane Tech in Chicago. The four of us have a group chat, and we'll send stuff throughout the season just of, hey, and it might be a clip of a game. It might be, I'm having trouble with a kid. What are your thoughts on how to reach him? Or what are your thoughts on discipline? How do you establish this in your culture? Like, Nick always brings a bunch of kids, and I don't know that I've seen a group of kids that plays as hard as his kids from Lane Tech. So it's just like, I always ask him, like, how do you get your guys to just sit down in a stance the way they do every single possession?
Yep.
And I admire that. It's so those are the kind of conversations that we have, and you just pick up so many little things. So I know that was I kind of dodged your question there, but
no, not at all. Because I know, again, I think anytime you have relationships, and especially when you're at great places like Snow Valley or with USA Basketball, you're obviously coming into contact with people who have had a tremendous amount of success in the game, whether they're well known or not. And so by sharing and coming in contact with all those people, you're pulling things from anybody that you meet. And so to ask you to narrow it down to one or two people probably isn't a fair question, but I definitely appreciate, again, what you shared and what you can pull out from those people that, again, some famous, some not so famous. And again, we're all learning. I think that's the one thing that the coaching profession is very good at is people being willing to share what they know. Because ultimately, the goal is obviously we want to have success as a coach. We want to win games, but we also want to grow the game. I think anybody who's coaching just truly loves the game of basketball, and when that's the case, we all want to see the game grow and get better and continue to be, the great game that it is. And so, to hear you share the things that you've learned from those coaches is just tremendously valuable to, I think, anybody who's out there listening.
And I would say, like, Tate's Lock, out of all the guys out there, I mean, and I think most coaches who are there would agree, he shares so much. He kind of calls the group out there the last of the Cowboys. But he's got so many great one-liners, and it's just about the way that you teach it. And one of the first things that he said in a clinic to coaches was, you got to teach in sound bites. You can't teach in monologues. And he's got so many. I have them on my bulletin board in my office, like these great ones, like eyes make layups. You catch passes with your eyes. Legs make shots. Great screeners are great offensive players. There are only 3 skills in the game of basketball: shooting, passing, and rebounding. There's only 3 reasons you should dribble: to get out of trouble, give yourself a better angle to pass, or get to the basket. And then the big one that I have in bold is, if you have a passion for the game and a passion for the kids, you have what it takes to be a great coach. But, like, I look at these every single day. I say 3/4 of these every single practice. And it resonates. And then the last one he always talks about, because he's got this great set of drills, box drills, and it's probably the best set of drills that I've ever seen as far as developing footwork. But he said every minute you're in the game, you're using your feet, so why not spend more time developing them versus just working on dribbling? It's so true. And we do his box drills at least 4 times a week in our practices, and we try ideally to have like about 1/3 of our practices being used for skill development. And a lot of that is because at the end of the day, I can have the best X's and O's in the world, but players are the ones who got to make the plays. So you want them as comfortable as possible making them, in as many different ways as possible.
Yeah, it's amazing how overlooked footwork is as a skill in the game of basketball. I think even, I don't know what your experience is like, but a lot of times when you start working on pivots, or you're working on, rip throughs, and you're working on squaring up, and you're working on catching the ball and popping out off a V-cut, or whatever the case may be, or coming off a screen, sometimes kids will look at you sideways, like, why can't I shoot the ball? Why aren't we working on shooting, or why aren't we, doing these fancy ball handling drills? And, again, it's important to educate players on the importance of, like you said, your feet are so critical in what you're doing. It goes back to, and sharing the why with, why, here's what we're doing, and then here's why we're doing it. I think that footwork's one of those things that really gets overlooked by the average player and average parent, fan, however you want to put it.
Well, and there's a great Billy Donovan story that I heard. He had a player who I want to say was like 2 for 11 and played 38 minutes. And so the next day in practice, Billy Donovan says to the guy, how many shots did you miss last night? He said 9. He puts his head down. And then he said, well, how long does it take you to shoot a shot? He's like, I don't know, a second? He's like, all right, so let me get this straight. You're telling me that you let 9 seconds dictate the other 37 minutes and, 51 seconds you were out there. And if you think about that a little bit,
that's an awesome story.
It puts a premium on it. And I think, for the kid, for them to think about that, I told that to our guys this year, and their eyes their mind, you could see the smoke coming out of their ears when they were putting it together, like, oh my gosh, yeah, okay, I can affect the game in more ways than just by making shots.
Yeah, again, that's something that players, I think, have a hard time. You have a hard time understanding. I could speak for myself. I know when I was a player, I definitely, if I was 2 for 11, it definitely would have affected me, for sure. And I think that it's important to be able to keep that in mind, that, the vast majority of your time on the floor, you're not shooting the ball. So look for other ways to contribute out there.
As a coach now, I'm envious of the kids who get more excited when they take a charge or get a deflection or get a defensive rebound and start a fast break than the guy who can get really excited after making a shot.
Right. Anybody can get excited after making a shot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Let's hit on one more thing, Jeff, before we finish up. So now you're working with Pro Skills Basketball down there in North Carolina. Can you talk a little bit about how you got involved with that organization, what your role is, and kind of where that's headed? Yes.
So I actually met Brendan Winters, who's one of the owners of Pro Skills Basketball, at the Charlotte Regional USA Basketball Camp 2 summers ago, and we just got to know each other. We kind of hit it off at the camp. I really liked the way that he taught, and I think Coach Showalter was speaking at a clinic or winning a gold medal or something, so he wasn't at the camp. But Brendan and I really kind of hit it off, and Coach had told him that I knew a lot of the drills that were already in the plan for the camp, and so through that, Brendan and I got pretty close. After we started talking about it, and he said, we don't have Asheville represented as a city, and I think it'd be great if we could at least get some camps going. So this summer was the first year we did it. We did 1 week of camp. And we had a really good turnout. I don't know if we could have taken many more campers. We're going to do a second session this summer. I think we're going to try and do some skill development stuff during school breaks as well. But they have a model. They're partnered with USA Basketball, their USA Basketball program. So it's really about teaching, and it's super inclusive. So our camps are open to boys and girls, ages 8 to 15, and we played 1 game a day. So it's about really developing skills, and we teach in clinics just like we did at Snow Valley. And the thing I like about the Pro Skills guys is if they trust you enough to run a city, they really trust you to run it your own way. But we're going to also be adding in some shooting camps as well. And it's a good way to teach the game. I really believe in how they're doing things. They have, in Charlotte, they have some AAU teams as well. So, a couple guys who play for me play for the Charlotte-based AAU teams. But they have cities all over the country now, and great coaches all over the place. So the 2 guys, Brandon Winters and Logan, who who run the show are both Davidson guys, and so that's where it started. There's actually a lot of the guys who run the cities all over the country have some relation to Davidson. They've either played there or coached there or both, but it's a really great organization.
Yeah, I know. I first came across that organization probably, I don't know, I would say maybe 3-4 years ago when I first started writing a little blog. And you're writing, and I'm always out there looking for ideas and seeing what people are, seeing what other people are doing, and just happened to come across their site. And at that point, I think they might have only, they might have only had their original location at that point, and then slowly, and actually, I guess I should say not slowly, they expanded, pretty quickly across to, like you said, to multiple cities across the country. So I think that they're obviously what they're doing, what they're teaching, and I know that I've read some of their stuff, and they have a podcast too going that I've listened to an episode or two. I think they had the philosophy that they have and the way that they're trying to go about teaching the game and just doing it and having it. I think what you said was, that it's very inclusive. They're not just trying to run out an elite program. They're trying to, touch kids at all levels of the game. And I think that's something that sometimes gets overlooked when, you talk about organizations that are doing a great job. A lot of people want to gravitate towards, those organizations that have, players who are in the top 50 high school players in the country or whatever. But we forget that the bigger impact that we can have is on the masses, and the masses are at a much younger level and a much less skilled level. It's more of a developmental program.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that Pro Skills is doing a really good job of as they continue to grow is they're not overextending themselves. They're growing in areas that make sense when they have the right people to do it. So they've recently started doing some academic exposure camps. So targeting kids that have great grades who want to play at the next level, and getting them exposed to great schools that have profiles that will fit with the kids' grades. So I think that makes a whole lot of sense. And that's where I think organizations can sometimes struggle in basketball, is when you try and be everything to everybody, when you don't have the right tools in place to support it. And that's when people get disappointed. But I just think Pro Skills is doing it the right way, and they have really good people, and they're incredibly thoughtful in the way that they try and expand.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems that way. Like I said, when they went from one location to multiple locations, and I would just really like the way that they're catering to all different levels. And I think that's something that if you do that and you don't have a singular focus on that quote unquote elite player, gives you an opportunity to have a bigger impact on the game of basketball, which is really what we're all about here. Jeff, this has been great. Is there anything that we haven't touched on tonight that you'd like to share with the audience? Something that we haven't talked about?
I don't think so. We covered most of it. I do have for any coaches that are interested, if you search on Championship Productions, I have a DVD from a Nike clinic that I spoke at a few years back about growing as a coach, and to that point, it's just the experiences. And leading up to that, I met with 4 or 5 mentors of mine, and really kind of grilled them about how I had grown as a coach to that point and things that I committed to. So talk about just different areas of growth. And then at the end, talk about some of my favorite drills, practices. So if you have some spare time and learn a little bit more about my journey and how I've grown, I do think it connects to a lot of coaches in their own journeys too. So you take a look at that. But that would be it.
Where can people find that?
So that's on the Championship Productions website, and you can do a digital download of that or get a DVD.
Okay, great. We'll put that in the show notes, and then can you also share with people out there how they can how they can reach out to you on Twitter and email, so that if anybody has any questions for you or just wants to reach out, share those contact information with the audience, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So my Twitter handle is @CoachJDHoops. And my email address is jeff@proskillsbasketball.com. And so if anybody has any questions, I will do my best to answer them or try and connect them with someone smarter than me.
Jeff, this has been a pleasure. We really appreciate you jumping on with us and spending an hour and a half here on the podcast. I think you've provided a lot of valuable information for people out there that they can take to make themselves a better coach or a better player or a better basketball parent. So we appreciate you taking the time. And to everyone out there, we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks.
Head Start Basketball's Player Development Academy offers Cleveland area players a unique opportunity to improve their basketball skills. Regardless of a player's age, skill level, or position, training with Head Start Basketball will elevate your game to the next level. Do you want to improve your ball handling, become a better shooter, or develop into a more skilled, confident player? Our Academy classes offer training that's designed to do just that. Our training sessions are innovative and will have you learning skills that are transferable to actual games. We have 4 different class skill levels for boys and girls, ages 4 and up. All Player Development Academy classes will be held at the Strongsville Recreation Center. For more information or to get registered, please visit www.headstartbasketball.com.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, brought to you by Head Start Basketball.